Good morning, everybody. Welcome. I hope you found us okay. I understand we might be on a new YouTube channel today. If you have done, well done. I'm really pleased to see you here with us. We're going to be focusing today on literacy, and I hope over the last few days you've been doing a really good job on your diary entries, and you've been writing your diary entries from the point of view of a Victorian child. Now, today, we're actually going to be reading a little bit from a really fantastic book called Street Child. And as you can imagine, this is set in the Victorian era. Now, this is a book which in class we're reading as a class reader. So we're reading about a chapter of this today. And if any mums and dads are watching and thinking, oh, actually, yeah, we could do with a new bedtime reading book, it might be a good one to get. I'll put a link in our description box down here if you'd like to get it. I just want to make clear that's by no means essential. You do not need to have the book. You don't need to be following along with us. You don't have to get it. But just in case anyone's interested, you might want to. It's a really lovely book. I should stress as well, it's not something that our year 3 children will probably be able to read themselves. It would be a kind of bedtime reader if you're going to do it. I'm reading out to the class in school. It's probably not one most of our year 3 children could read independently, but it is a really good one for them to be listening to, because it's a really good story set in the Victorian era, and lots of the things that happen to the main character Jim Jarvis, we will be writing similar sorts of things happening to our Victorian character. You do not need to buy the book, but you might like to. So a couple of things before we read our first chapter today. I'm going to ask you some reading comprehension questions on what we've read, so make sure you're listening carefully. There's a couple of bits of vocabulary that we're going to encounter today, which I think, maybe we wouldn't be too confident with these. So I thought I'd start off actually and just introduce a couple of bits of vocabulary. It's hearth and meat pudding. You might be thinking, maybe you've got some understanding of those things. Maybe like me, you absolutely love a meat pudding. I have to say, I adore a meat pudding. But equally, you might be thinking, meat pudding? Aren't puddings meant to be sweet? So I thought I'd show you a couple of pictures just in case you weren't too sure either of these things were. A hearth, really, we can think of essentially as a fireplace. It's a fireplace where you would, particularly in the Victorian times, people would have heated things on their hearth and cooked them, or heated them up, as is the case in this one. And a meat pudding, look at that, delicious. Oh, that looks amazing. Meat pudding is essentially just a pie. It's another name for a pie, but I think they call it a meat pudding in chapter 1 today. So I'm going to be reading from chapter 1. This is the very start of the book. Jim Jarvis hopped about on the edge of his road, his feet blue with cold. Passing carriages flung muddy snow up into his face and his eyes, and the swaying horses slithered and skidded as they were whipped on by their drivers. Obviously no cars in the Victorian era. At last, Jim saw his chance and made a dash for it through the traffic. The little shops in the dark street all glowed yellow with their hanging lamps, and Jim dodged from one light to the next until he came to the shop he was looking for. It was the meat pudding shop. Hungry boys and skinny dogs hovered round the doorway, watching for scraps. Jim pushed past them, his coin as hot as a piece of coal in his fist. He could hear his stomach gurgling as the rich smell of hot gravy met him. Mrs. Hodder was trying to sweep the soggy floor of her shop and sprinkle new straw down as Jim ran in. "You can run right out again," she shouted to him. "I'm sick of little boys like you." "But I've come to buy a pudding," Jim told her. He danced up and down, opening and closing his fist so his coin winked at her like an eye. She prized it out of his hand and bit it to check that it was real. "Where'd you find this, you little shrimp?" she asked him. "And stop your dancing. You're making me rock like a ship at sea." Jim hopped onto a dry patch of straw. "I got it from Ma's purse, and she said there won't be no more because that's the last shilling we've got. And I know that's true because I emptied it for her. So make it a good one, Mrs. Hodder. Make it big and lots of gravy." A shilling, just in case you're wondering, is a Victorian coin. That's an old money. He ran home with the pie clutched to his chest, warming him through its cloth wrapping. Some of the boys outside the shop tried to chase him, but he soon lost them in the dark alleys, his heart thudding in case they caught up with him and stole the pie. At last he came to his home, in a house so full of families that he sometimes wondered how the floors and walls didn't come tumbling down with the weight and the noise of them all. He ran up the stairs and burst into the room his own family lived in. He was panting with triumph and excitement. "I've got the pie! I've got the pie!" he sang out. "Shh!" His sister Emily was kneeling on the floor, and she turned round to him sharply. "Ma's asleep, Jim." Lizzie jumped up and ran to him, pulling him over towards the fire so they could spread out the pudding cloth on the hearth. They broke off chunks of pastry and dipped them into the brimming gravy. "What about Ma?" asked Lizzie. "She won't want any," Emily said. "She never eats these days." Lizzie pulled Jim's hand back as he reached out for another chunk. "But the gravy might do her good," she suggested. "Just a little taste. Stop shoveling it down so fast, Jim. Let Ma have a bit." She turned round to her mother's pile of bedding and pulled back the ragged cover. "Ma," she whispered, "try a bit. It's lovely." She held a piece of gravy-soaked pie crust to her lips, but her mother shook her head and turned over, huddling her rug round her. "I'll have it," said Jim, but Lizzie put it on the corner of her mother's bed rags. "She might feel like it later," she said. "The smell might tempt her." "I told you," said Emily. "She don't want no food no more. That's what she said." Jim paused for a moment in his eating, his hand resting over his portion of the pie in case his sisters tried to snatch it away from him. "What's the matter with Ma?" he asked. "Nothing's the matter," said Emily. She chucked a log on the fire, watching how the flames curled themselves round it. "She's tired is all," Lizzie prompted her. "She just wants to sleep, don't she?" "But she's been asleep all day," Jim said, "and yesterday, and the day before that." "Just eat your pie," said Emily. "You heard what she said. There's no more shillings in that purse, so don't expect no more pies after this one." "She'll get better soon," Lizzie said, "and then she'll be able to go back to work. There's lots of jobs for cooks. We'll soon be out of this place. That's what she told me, Jim." "Will we go back to our cottage?" Jim asked. Lizzie shook her head. "You know we can't go back there, Jim. We had to move out when Father died." "Eat your pie," said Emily. "She wants us to enjoy it." But the pie had grown cold before the children finished it. They pulled their rag pile close to the hearth and curled up together, Jim between Emily and Lizzie. In all the rooms of the house, they could hear people muttering and yawning and scratching. Outside in the street, dogs were howling and carriage wheels trundled along the slushy roads. Jim lay awake. He could hear how his mother's breath rattled in her throat, and he knew by the way she tossed and turned that she wasn't asleep. He could tell by the way his sisters lay taut and still at each side of him that they were awake too, listening through the night to its noises, longing for day to come. Street Child, good book for you to read. So today then, I'm going to ask you a few questions based on what we've read. And what I'd really love is a written response to these, in particular, using the word because. In fact, I'm going to put this one up here as well. Really important word today, because. I'd love to see a because in your answer. I'm going to ask you some questions that are that you are going to have to really kind of think for yourself about the answer to. It's not just a case of looking in the text and finding it. You're going to need to make some inferences of your own. And we've looked at inferences already this year. Inference or inferring means to kind of read between the lines a little bit and understand what the author is hinting at. So they might not give the answer explicitly, they might not say exactly what we're looking for, but we can make sense of what they've written. We can get what they've hinted at and implied, and we can infer some meaning from it. And we're going to use this word because in our answer to justify why we think something. So here's your first question. There's a little extract there for you to read. What does this paragraph tell us about Jim's family and where they live? So read that back to yourself now, and I'd like you to try to come up with your own ideas. What do you think that paragraph tells us about Jim's family and where they live? You can pause here and write your answer, and remember, I'm after a because in the answer. Here are a few more extracts. These are all separate extracts I've pulled from the text here. What do you notice about the way these Victorian children are speaking? Is there anything unusual about the way they're speaking? If so, what does it tell you about them? What do you think the author, Burley Doherty, is trying to imply here by the way that she's written these Victorian children's voices? Again, pause, write down your answer for that and come back to me. It's quite a big chunk here. I've put that in there. You might just actually remember from the text. I want you to answer this. What do you think is going to happen to the mother? What gives you that impression? Could you maybe pick out a quote or two from this extract? I really want a because in there. I want you to say why you think that's going to happen to her. So there's a few questions there for you to have a go at. Hopefully you've been following along there, and I hope also you've enjoyed that extract from Street Child. Really good book. I've left a link in the description if you'd like to get a copy for yourself. I'll just say again, there is no need to get one. I don't want anyone to feel like they need to rush out and buy a copy. That's not the case at all. And likewise, it's probably not for year 3 children to independently read. It's probably a bit tricky for that. But if you're looking for a good sort of bedtime story or one to read at home, one you can read to your children, might be a good one for the next few weeks and months, because this would really match nicely to our topic. So it's there in the description if you'd like it. But again, there's no need to. I don't want anyone to feel they've got to rush out and spend money on it. Okay, thanks everyone. Hope you've enjoyed that, and I'll see you back here for maths shortly. Have fun.